I guess so.
Okay.
Public comment. Public comment, any items that are not on the agenda that anyone would like to bring forward? Okay, hearing none, we will move on to the issue of the annual report. And this, I think, was a joint project between Shayla and Jill and then reviewed by Chapin. So Emily, is our task to, do we vote on this or is it just for review? What is the protocol here?
You can vote on it. It might get edited further by the clerk when she has to squish things to meet page limits in the town report. So you can vote on it or just say, yeah, it's good in general. Okay.
There are a couple of questions in it. Could we pull up the draft and quickly resolve
Yeah.
those?
Yeah, those are still outstanding. So we need a photo. And then I had asked that we could put dates on, I honestly don't remember myself when, like when did Alex join? And I think that we had the election to change from Chapin to me as chair in what, July or August? I can't remember. But I feel like
July.
those kinds of things, we should have dates on them. Alex, do you remember when you started? Is it like October or something?
Yeah, I joined last year, so I've been here a little more than a year. Is it, what's FY21? Is it July to July or is it calendar
Yeah.
year?
Yeah.
July to July. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe it was October
Okay.
of 2020.
That's great. Yeah. So if we can just add those details, I just feel like it
And
keeps
this
things.
is FY21. So July 20 to June of this year. Were all those meetings online?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. We only had one in-person meeting this calendar year, which was that brief moment when we thought that things were looking good in whatever it was, late July or something like that. Yes. So, and then were there other questions or comments in the annual report?
My
really hard
question
to
there
see.
is, I wasn't sure who put in that Ron Bomer helped create a more publicly accessible map. And if that's the map that Melinda made for us, I just thought we should credit her because she did an amazing job making that map for getting input onto the official map.
I wasn't quite sure what that was referring to.
Oh, remember Ron worked with somebody to create a more generalized bike ped map for Williston.
Right. And that was
rich. So it was one of the tools that was put into the preliminary work on official map was.
Okay.
We're gonna come back to that before you know it as part of this project. So.
Okay. So maybe a little bit more explanation there would be helpful. Okay, anything else?
And then I suggested adding what's showing now, which is just, we didn't say why we're doing form-based code. And I feel as though we are responding to public, there's other reasons too, but a primary reason is responding to public outcry over the kind of development that's been happening. And so I didn't know if we wanted to put something there.
Yeah, I mean, it has longer history than that, but I think that was certainly a spark.
Yeah, and I think
I mean,
we
I
are
think,
respond.
go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was just gonna say, I think we are responsive to comments from the public, and we've received a lot of comments about wanting
Yeah.
things different there. And so I just wanted to include that we were responding to the public
Sure.
somehow. I didn't,
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay, that's a great suggestion.
oh yeah.
Let's see.
And GU9 had a question about what did we ask for about the RZD open space thing? And I put in the comments the notes that I had, but I don't know if that's enough.
Okay, any further information on that point? I think we may lose some of the details in any case when this gets edited down to the page limit.
Yeah.
And then my
Yeah.
comment is just there that, sorry.
Never mind.
I thought Kate, you wanted to say
No,
something.
no,
I
I'm
was,
I'm all good. I thought it said the application was denied in early 2022, but it says fiscal year 2022, so
Yeah,
it's fine.
so at the very end there, my comment was just that we sort of all have our names on this. And so it felt a little stilted to me above to be at every paragraph say the commission, this commission, that,
uh-huh.
and wondered if we shouldn't say we and be a little more inclusive, but that's a question.
I guess that might depend on how it's typically done year to year. Emily, maybe you can figure it out. I
Is
think
it-
I might have a slight preference for leaving it as the commission,
Okay.
because we, I think, could be a little more ambiguous.
Okay.
You know, does that include town staff? Does that
That's
include, you
good.
know, like, as you're
Mhm.
reading, you know,
That's good. Yep.
It is the commission did this or that type of
right,
phrasing,
Okay.
right.
the board, et cetera.
Reports in the town report vary hugely as to their style, but I think your
Right.
point is well taken.
Okay.
Forget any suggestion change. Thanks.
Okay, good. Any other comments on the annual report? I just want to thank Shayla and Jill and Chapin for such nice, careful work and for taking this on. Busy time of year. Not that I've found a time of year that isn't busy yet, so, but thank you for that. And so I guess, Emily, will you be kind of massaging this into the final version?
Yeah, I have dates on like the elections and when Alex joined, crediting Melinda and finessing that sentence about official map and the graphically rich official map. This sentence about form-based code is not just a town plan statement, but also feedback to what we've heard from the community. Finesse a sentence about RZD open space. And then throw in a picture. We could either do that visually graphic official map, or maybe a screenshot from, you know, the form-based code outreach we did in April and May.
Mhm.
And that might read better at a smaller size too.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay, that sounds good. Great, thank you for that. All right. Back once again to my many screens. All right, so we are now ready to dive in to our ongoing push through form-based code. And looks like we'll be finishing up, talking about building form standards, which is section 3. And then hoping to cover the public realm section, which is section 5. And I did notice that that section 5 is quite a bit shorter than than some of the ones we've been doing. So hopefully we can get through this tonight. And I will turn it over to the experts here.
Megan, before we do get going, we do have a member of the public that joined in while we were doing minutes. I
Oh,
don't know if you
okay.
wanna do another round of public comment request.
Sure. Yep, I'm happy to pause for public comment if anybody has anything they'd like to say. Otherwise, we'll just welcome you to to the meeting and move forward. And you're welcome to raise your hand either visually on video or using the Zoom functions to raise the virtual hand if you'd like to have a question. Okay, so I think, is it Jeff who's going to dive right in here, or Matt,
Yeah,
did you have any?
A quick intro and note, if I can.
Yeah,
So first, thanks to a couple of you for having a run through our attempt at a survey on the building form standards. We are scheduled to try to do public realm tonight as well. And since Jeff's got Rick Chelman here, who's our lead on the street sections, we've talked amongst ourselves and recommend that we jump into public realm first and then try to swing back around through building form. Based on some of the comments in the survey, I think there's a few things in building form that the consultant and staff team can probably get together and address anyway. But I'd like to see if folks are okay if we jump into public realm first. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, we have jumped. Hoping you're all seeing my screen. I'm going to talk fast or maybe flip through the images more quickly. It's about giving everybody a sense of where we are and trying to put things in a perspective. So, beware, I'm trying to influence your point of view here. So first of all, we talked about earlier the 3 easy pieces. We talked about the building form standards last meeting, and there's a portion of that is the 3 easy pieces are really only 3 pieces if you're the private sector and you're an end user. You are the town. So like it or not, you're part of the public sector and government. To really plan this out, you also have to do the public realm standards. Now, we talked earlier, and you've probably seen this more than once, the idea that in a form-based code, the public sector is setting up the rules, and for the form-based part is defining the street space. With the public realm standards, we're dealing with what happens in between the buildings and make sure that that black and white image of the trees, the sidewalk, the tree lawns, the travel lanes, and all that are done right. That's not a coding issue, that's a specifying issue, so that it all comes together and in partnership with the private sector, something great gets built. You can get the developers oftentimes to pay for those things, but they're really a very specific public design. Talking about streets, and really it's not just the place where the cars are, it's the whole thing. They're different types. It's not a one size fits all. It's actually a bunch of different pieces that fit together. It's a network. And some examples in Berlin, Unter den Linden, a great boulevard, most like 2A, could be, most like 2A is right now. And on the left, this is a Muse Street in Philadelphia. We don't have anything like that here unless somebody private builds it within one of the blocks, which they're invited to do. And something we don't have a section for, but we have rules for pedestrian passages, ensuring, generally these will be things just like this. You can tell that's from the sidewalk back through to a parking area or the back of the building. The rules make sure that those are straight and visible, no hiding places. It's a short connection. And then I'll plant a seed in everybody's head a few more times about fall color and tree species. Now, when we talk about trees, everyone I think understands, a lot of people have talked about the biological value to them, their habitat, they're literally and figuratively green, but a point about them as architectural, structural elements. This is a street, not one of our streets, but a particular street, 100 feet wide, has a median. That's actually a pretty wide street. It's the 4-lane, and that median could be a left turn. With trees, you take that big space, then one level has one reading of the big 100-foot wide space, but the trees start to subdivide it. Now, when you look directly across the street, of course, the trees don't block your view unless you're standing right in front of one. So you see the whole space, but as you look down the street, that 100-foot street is subdivided into smaller sections that really make it feel better. And a point here about limits to what the architecture does. This isn't going to be a bunch of buildings sitting alone across the landscape or the parking lots in Taft Corners. These are going to be buildings along streets, and the street trees, and I don't mean simplistically just block the view, but they filter, they create their own space. So I'm suggesting the buildings don't have to be perfect. As a matter of fact, they can be kind of banal. And by building the good street space, you get, this street's right around the corner from where I live. I take it for granted, but it's really pretty wonderful, even when it's not fall color. Technique, I'm going to flip through things that we have avoided big time. The street sections we're going to show you are very good for the trees, which means the trees will grow and thrive, and this will be a very green place except in fall. Root bound, we don't do it. That's a crypt, not a tree planting area. The problem with those lovely bronze and very expensive tree grates is any lapse in maintenance, which there is 90% of the time, and it starts to gird the tree. And you know, trees, they live in the outer few inches. So, you know, somebody has a lapse in the budget and the tree starts to die. We're not planting the trees close to the curb where they're going to get hit by cars. We're back 3 and 4 feet. The sections we're providing for a continuous soil trench. And there are a lot of different ways to do this, but basically the trees are going to see a lot of soil, connected soil as well, which they can use more efficiently than just a single tree. They can actually share soil in some ways we don't fully understand. This is an image that is actually in the code, suggestive. Silvacells, basically plastic structures that will hold up the sidewalk and keep that from compacting the soil. Then you have uncompacted soil and utilities, et cetera, underneath it. This is really the gold standard. You've seen this picture before. The reason those trees are healthy and probably at this point about 2 or 3 times as big, because it's no picture, is that brick you see is on top of something like an aggregate structural soil, not as good as a silvacell because it's older than silvacells, but the tree roots actually see a lot of soil. That's pervious, those are pervious pavers. So you're going to have great street trees, and that's hugely important. It means we'll all come back 5 years after they're planted and be impressed. And 10 years will be wowed. I'm going to shift to not street trees, but street lights. There's some real easy arguments against why Cobra heads, the bottom image, are just bad and inappropriate. And it's not, you can't say, well, we're talking about lighting the human area. And if you think about the relationship and height, the sort of, I'll call them traditional street lights on top make sense because the scale of them makes sense. And those things that are as high as, 8 people stacked on top of one another obviously aren't. But here's an even more kind of functional, uncaring reason that the ones on the bottom are a stupid idea. If they're lighting a parking lot, they can be really bright, lumens on the ground, they look really efficient. But in an environment like this, as soon as the trees have leaves, all that light never makes it. I mean, there's really pragmatic reasons for having limited height of the streetlights and a few more streetlights. It's aesthetically better and it works better. Cobra heads are bad. And this is an image that shows some fine street furniture, but a little bit tongue in cheek. You can have too many benches. This is a project we did, 2010, and this was actually about 6 years after the code, 7 years after the code was adopted. A project. There are too many benches there, but those are good benches. And we've got specifications in the code for how often benches have to happen. But this is a bit much, unless that's a bus stop. A point about street trees and money, a percentage of the budget. Don't try and read the dollar figures. They're old. More look at the kind of the piece of the pie that the street tree infrastructure is in this installation. And these were New York City. This was a New York City project by the architect Henry Arnold, who's no longer alive, but is one of the great landscape architects for urban trees. It's a small piece of the pie when you think about how trees that are properly planted start to grow and take over. Well worth the investment. It's something that just grows, increases in value over time. Guess what kind of trees these are? These are Dutch elms. So talking about the big bugaboo, Dutch elms, this is the before picture. And this was a monoculture throughout, not just whatever city this was, which I've forgotten, it's some Midwestern city. There was like a monoculture over states and states of cities. That's dumb. And because this is the after picture. When you have a monoculture, you get some kind of an invasive that just has a heck of a time and, feasts on them. I think the reaction of too many people, I think it's time for us to have our second generation thinking about this. The initial reaction is kind of like when I'm sure at some point in everybody's life when they were kids, they burned their hand on the stove. Well, so that doesn't mean you never go in the kitchen again. I mean, I don't think anybody did that, but you're smarter about how you approach and use the stove. We are now smarter about trees. We have resistant species. We understand the factors. And I'm a big critic of regulations that say every other street tree needs to be of a different species. I will assert strongly makes as much sense as never going near the stove again because you burned your finger once. We need to do this more smartly and manage it and realize that it's not 1950. We know more things than we did. Doesn't mean to be stupid, but a word about the incredible synergy that comes from planting the same or similar species. You should have species diversity over all of Taft Corners, but there's great value in having consistent species in small pockets because you get this kind of, there are a lot of famous quotes when I was in landscape architecture. I took a semester at University of Virginia, quoting these old, crusty, famous landscape architects, male and female, getting all excited about it's a riot of color and things like that. But it's just this is a tree in DC of ginkgos. And when they turn, it's like yellow electric. And also just the form of the tree. There's a synergy in that. I don't think we should abandon that, but I'm going to stop talking about it because we have so much else to talk about. By the way, one thing you might consider for your minutes instead of trying to write everything I'm saying, which I feel sorry for whoever's trying to do that, but is maybe have a reference, a PDF of this PowerPoint. But this is a long quote from Henry Arnold. Yeah. Is that Emily who has to try and write this?
Jeff talked, here's a link.
Here, Henry Arnold, a page writing a synopsis of a number of great statements of his about trees in an urban environment. And things like a tree, well, you heard Victor Dover quote some of his things. I used to harangue Victor Dover about Henry Arnold. Trees are 50% of urban design, et cetera. So please read that in the PDF, which I'll give to Matt and Emily tomorrow morning. Now we're going to talk about the street sections. Again, mantra, not one size fits all. Going to start, this is an image of the 74-foot street space. That's including the dooryards. The right-of-way would be smaller, minus those dooryards. You should all have this in your packet. Where we have, if we don't get the Aldis and we do get Wright Avenue to be a main street, that section of it would be this 74-foot street space. And in that situation, the dooryard, as well as pieces in the tree lawn between the trees, like you see in this drawing, could be paved over. So that as a pedestrian, that retail area, you've got a lot of space. It's not just the 6 feet of has to be clear sidewalk. You've also got 5 feet in front of the shops where they can have cafes, tables, signboards, et cetera. But you've also got space in between the trees. And I've seen a number of places where they have tables in the dooryards, but also in that area between the trees. Actually, one of the really highly rated images in the survey during the charrette was of a place like that in Bethesda. So there's the 74. This also can serve as a residential street in other parts of Taft Corners. That would be, then you'd have just the sidewalk and the others would be green. The next is the 80-foot. Here, the tree lawn is a little bit bigger. The dooryard goes up to 7 feet. You'll also notice the travel lanes in the middle were showing 10 feet and 11. For most places, we're recommending 11-foot lanes, but there's some places where it could be 10. There'll be less traffic. That'll also slow the traffic down more. And the suggestion is, well, the proposal is where you have that extra foot, throw it into the tree lawn. And then the 86-foot street space. This is the cycle track street. I think we can call this the framework street. This is the street that would, this section, and of course it's going to get modified a little bit when it's on Williston Road or 2, but that's about an 80-foot section. So you'd have Williston 2A north of Williston, and then Harvest Lane and a couple of other streets. So there's a framework of both the cycle track, the 6-foot one-way cycle track up on the curb that has a network going through Taft Corners, a great way to get around. And those streets would also tend to carry more traffic. So we're thinking of them as framework streets, and you wouldn't want to be a bicyclist in the lane, which you might in some of the others. So we've gone 74, 80, 86. And then you can imagine 2A, south of Wilson Road, south of the beginner section, down to Marshall and a little bit beyond. Here we've got a 12-foot median, which actually the tree has 11 feet of clear soil, 2 11-foot lanes. There's a 1-foot kind of a, I'm going to call it a gutter pan. If that's absolutely wrong, Rick will correct me. In front of the curb face, that's something we probably need to do. I think if we let some would say who aren't thinking about aesthetics and pedestrian comfort the way we are, would want that to be 2 feet. We're pinching that down to 1. And then the bicycle lanes up on the curb, 16 feet of tree lawn. All 3 rows of trees here will thrive. Certainly the ones in the 16-foot side tree lawns are. And at one point earlier, we'd drawn a double row of trees here, but the tree lawn in front of my house in Washington, D.C. is 15 feet from the sidewalk to the back of the curb. And I've got this beautiful red oak in it. It's really big. It's only about 30 years old. 7-foot sidewalk and 5-foot dooryard. Chapin.
Hi, I just wondered, in terms of cycle track being up on the curb next to the road, when it's rainy or slushy weather, the vehicles will be splashing the bicyclists, and if the snow has been plowed, we have to move it further. Are there alternatives on where the cycle track could go?
I think that's probably the best place. It might also be the easiest place. And Rick, can you jump in and opine on the ability to move the snow past the bike lanes?
I'm just thinking about the comment in different other locations. To answer your question, Chapin, of course, that will happen, but, and cycle tracks do require different maintenance. One thing I have done that Jeff doesn't like, I put them beside sidewalks and then move the trees up to the curb near the motor vehicle space. So then you have a wider area that pedestrians and bicyclists on the cycle track can use together, and you can maintain it with a small truck or a Bobcat. That does put cyclists beside pedestrians, immediately beside them at the same grade, which is a little bit problematic. We're anticipating, and on all these cycle tracks, by the way, that doesn't mean you can't cycle in the road. You'll still get the Class A cyclists wanting to be in the road. So we'll leave those guys and gals out there as they need to be. I've done it both ways. It's easier at the intersections to have them closer to the travel lane because you don't have as much angular crossing to get to the intersection, and you're more merging with the vehicles themselves because you do have to get the cyclists to make their left turns as well as their right turns at intersections. So if we pull them back, say in this section that's on the screen, back to the sidewalk, it gets a little more difficult at the intersections to try to get across that 16-foot tree space. It's a trade-off, but I think it is more maintenance, but I think it's worth the additional maintenance to do it this way.
Is it an option to have them just moved 4 feet over towards the trees so there's a little bit of a buffer between the traffic and the bicyclists?
I think you just really complicated the construction and maintenance of that area. I'm just thinking then you just double the number of edges they have to trim. And then,
Well, but it's also, now you got a 4-foot sort of dead space that could otherwise be dedicated to the trees. And if you keep the trees at 16 feet, now you've increased the crossing of the street, to get from one side to the other and the distance to see from one side to the other. So,
No, my question was reducing the trees to 12 feet and having 4 feet, yes, of wasted space or place that snow can temporarily be and the bikes can still use, or just so you don't get splashed as much. Just wondering, and I'm not pushing. Thanks.
Megan, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was in pondering this, I wonder if 2A in particular might be a place where we would want to follow Rick's preferred configuration where the cycle track is over next to the sidewalk. Given the sort of speed and volume of the traffic on 2A, I realize it will potentially be slower, especially if we make each direction go down to 1 lane. But that's just a thought. Another question maybe for Rick is whether there's any seasonal treatment that you've ever explored, thinking that, for instance, if this was a at grade bike lane, but seasonally separated with those like rubber bumper things or some other kind of feature that could be removed in the winter so that plows could get through. It would mean that the winter cycle track was really just an unprotected bike lane, And maybe that's not a goal here at all. But I just wondering if there are any seasonal kinds of treatments because of our climate and the ways that, you know, despite the fact that I actually did bike commute today, there's very little cycling in the winter on this kind of street.
It's partly, in my experience, it's partly a matter of what you provide for facilities in terms of what people bicycle. And in Minneapolis, St. Paul, for example, is an extraordinarily cold environment, and they have a very, very vibrant cycling community because they have a lot of cycling infrastructure. This sort of blending the two comments, yours and Chapin's, having the cycle track next to the travel way like this is it's more for real transportation and not just recreation. The option that I mentioned, putting it next to the sidewalk, would be more of a lower use, more of a residential, being terrific route to school street, that sort of thing. Again, where this is a possible option for 2A, which will have significant volumes of traffic, probably for a very long time, certainly beyond our lifetimes. I'm back to we didn't diagram this, but if you can imagine, if we move the cycle track over to next to the 7 feet, and if we go up to the upper right part of the drawing, now trying to get those cyclists, because you have to treat them like vehicles, because they are vehicles. Now we have to get those vehicles across the tree lawn over to the intersection, assuming there's a cross street up there. I believe me, I've done this. The geometry gets difficult, and if you make it too short, now you don't have enough distance for the motor vehicles to see them. So you want to have a smooth transition so that the people in the motor vehicles can see the cyclists and not have them all of a sudden appear from behind trees and other features. So I would, this sort of a design decision is not arithmetic. There are trade-offs as we're seeing with this conversation, but so far, I haven't heard anything that would compel me on this section to move I could see moving it back from 2A a couple of feet perhaps, but then we end up again with that sort of a dead space and extra maintenance, because you will get vegetation growing in there no matter what you do.
That's
So
showing
you
the
just have
between the
extra
6 and the 11, right?
maintenance issues. Somebody was talking, I didn't hear what they were saying.
Oh, that was me. I was just noting that there is a space like 6 feet and 11 feet. There's like that white strip, which is probably about a foot or so.
Yeah, Emily, that's a striped, you see the travel lane, the motor vehicle travel lanes are shown as 11 feet, but there's actually white striping going along the face of just inside a curb. So from center of stripe line to center of stripe line is 11 feet. From face of curb to face of curb across that travelway is 24 feet, not 22. So it's an optical narrowing thing, which Jeff didn't mention, but I'll mention now. That's another big benefit of trees. When you have that vertical enclosure on the sides of street that trees can provide, that will slow vehicles down a little bit. So that's another important part of this type of design. Does that help?
Thanks for that. That was really helpful. That was great. Thank you.
John's had his hand up for a while.
Yeah, the thing with with your street plows, the trucks have the wing plows on them. And I think they go probably at least 4 feet beyond the curb, which I believe when they go through, they would clean a lot of that bike path that you're looking at. And then after a storm's over, you'd come back and widen it out a little bit more, clean it up. But I think the truck going through with the wing plow would do quite a job of keeping a lot of the bike path clear during a storm.
That's a good point. Yeah.
But my understanding is, but isn't this up on a curb though? I don't know that the wing plows, can they do that, John?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
within reason, they will go up on top of a curb,
I see.
push the banks back.
And it's,
It's only up 6 inches. It's not up, this isn't a monster curb.
so it's pretty clearly a whole bunch of competing interests, and most, but not all of which Rick and I talked back and forth. One thing I'm very focused on is, because I've seen it, is the potential for bicycle pedestrian conflicts. If it's someone who's just tootling along, the family out with their kids, they're not going very fast, but so many bicyclists on these trails, they're moving along at 15 miles an hour at least, and that's a real possibility for serious injury.
Well, and as I was saying, Jeff, this is in this section, this is for real transportation. This is for people who really want to use a bicycle, not just for recreation. This is if you really want to get from point A to point B. So you're apt to be going a little bit faster on a cycle track like this than the one you're just talking about. And so I think we're in agreement on that.
Okay, Chapin's got his hand up.
I just want to say you've convinced me these explanations are very good. And I think for Route 2A, I agree that this is the best compromise. And this is not relevant to this picture, but I wanted to get this in. We just talked about 6-inch curb. And on side streets, I wanted to make sure our designs don't have smaller cars having their doors hit the curb or the grass beyond the curb when they open their door after parking, which is a problem in a lot of places in the world.
How many lowriders do you have in Williston?
A lot. Well, and we're trying, it has a lot to do, I mean, I've driven VWs a lot in my life, and most European-made cars have that issue, whereas SUVs do not.
Are you parking your Maserati around again? Okay, we do have two more to show. I think it's two. This is a section that, yeah, and you'll see it in the map, where we have a one-way going around a green. Because and this is the techniques of it, Rick can explain better, but basically we go to a 13-foot lane because with parking on both sides, there's just a lot of possibilities for someone parallel parking. So it's a little bit more maneuvering room. These are generally pretty short. So anyone can see the terminus where they have to turn. That helps control speed a little bit. So everything on the right-hand side has been grayed out because that'll just be a continuation of whatever street type is coming into the green and beyond it. So that's not specific here. What is specific is the 7-foot tree lawn, 6-foot sidewalk that would be going around all the greens. And I have something, this isn't really a street section, it's a configuration. It does two things. For the pedestrians among us, it's a mid-block section, and there's language in the standards about a block, and we haven't picked it yet, but sort of 300 feet is when you start thinking about it. Having this mid-block staging area, and if you're a pedestrian, that means you don't have to go more than 150 or 200 feet to get to a place where it's very convenient to cross. You're only crossing the travel lanes. Also, a car going down this street will see, even if nobody's parked, there's the curb stepping out to help really make the driver think and feel the speed. If you're Aaron, if you're the fire chief, this is a place that's reserved where there aren't trees here, where you can park your gigantic ladder truck, prop out your outriggers without fear of having to put them through, set them down on top of Chapin's Volkswagen or Maserati, whichever he has out that day, and take that up and then run the ladder truck in all directions. Also, fire hoses, there's a general rule that they can run them 150 feet from a hydrant. So this would be a convenient place for the town to plan infrastructure like and place things like hydrants here. So this is does double duty. And then finally, the always underestimated but very important alley. And simply put, it's kind of 18 feet of pavement, which, and then 3 feet on either side. So it's a 24-foot right of way. The building form standards all have some kind of a setback from that line. So this is something that should be in the back of or going through almost all the blocks. There may be an exception where something's a bit different, but this is a basic alley form. It'll take all the loading and parking, off-street parking off of this. And here's what you don't have, and I apologize for that, the streets map. And the next slide, I'm gonna zoom in and cut this off. But this is what the street specifications would be in I don't know, in an alternate universe where what's happening up there would be within the Taft Corners code and there wouldn't be any garage doors facing the street. So I'm gonna zoom in next so we can see better and exclude that. And also some of Finney Crossing, which it's the part that's built, so we're not really changing anything up there, but this is Zephyr. Now these darker green streets, these have the cycle track. It's not the only place that there are bicycle tracks. If you look in the vision statement, there are also proposals for bicycle trails that would go along this edge and out through the landscape park here, also connecting up north. So those would plug into this. But you see the framework, and in a perfect world, this would be a little more direct route, but it's not. So we have that kind of little funny loop, but this would all be connected. And you see where the green doesn't go all the way through, that's just acknowledging there's some engineering to be done where those intersections happen. But in general, that's the cycle track, the 86-foot section. Now what happens on 2A, the cycle track configuration is the same, but that's a special section. The Williston Road up top, until you get out here where the right-of-way gets really wide, and I think that's a problem you might want to address down the road, because it's just I'd say wasted width. But there's cycle tracks on that. Then the lime green, that's a step down. That's the 80-foot section. So you see there's a besides the framework, then there's a little bit of a variation. There's some places, the 74-foot section, and a very few places where you see I'll call this the melon color or golden. That's a 74-foot section with 10-foot travel lanes. And the 10 or 11-foot travel lanes, that might shift a little bit. 10-foot lanes are great in slowing down traffic and narrowing the street. We're not sure how often we can have them. So orange 74, gold 74, and then the kind of different greens. And interestingly, there's a 36 80-foot section, and the only place we're showing it, let me go back. I thought we had, there's a little bit over here. That may expand, but we're only showing it up here. Generally, the 10-foot sections are out on really localized streets off to the side. They won't be carrying much traffic. And the traffic they're carrying, automobile, you want to constrain them and slow them down. Chapin.
What does the 36 and 38 stand for?
Sorry, I have to go. I didn't realize I had to go back that far. Okay, looking in the middle of this, when you have, that's the pavement width from here to here, including on-street parking. So the 36 is just where you go from a 10-foot lanes to 10-foot lane. 11-foot lanes to 10-foot lanes. So the 36, the first number is that asphalt in the middle of the block.
Thank you. And something I wonder about is on the one that you showed us, which was new to me, with the one with the on-street parking, with parking on both sides, ones that go around a green.
Yes.
When you have basically the parking on that, can you get to that one easily? The parking, I think, was 10 foot wide.
No, parking's on all streets, we've got it as 8.
8 foot, okay. And so you have a wide vehicle who doesn't quite get over to the curb. And I realize you made the pavement in the center be 13 feet instead of 11 feet or whatever a normal lane is. Can we pull that photo up? What I was worried about is, as you know, pointed out, when people are parallel parking, they swing their front end out. And then if I just say, if people don't park perfectly, 8 foot is pretty narrow to get your vehicle
Well,
into.
Yeah, although I would point out, and I parallel park, oh, sorry,
That might have been it there.
well, they're all, let me go, I'll go to the green. Yeah, I went right
Yeah.
by it. I parallel park, I don't drive every day, but
There.
I can't control myself. I don't drive every day, but when I do drive, I parallel park a couple of times. And by the way, no cars on the road are wider than 8 feet. To be wider than 8 feet, you have to get that oversized load permit. But yeah, there's nothing you can do about somebody who just parks in the middle of the street except give them a big fat ticket.
Yeah, and really, I was just asking, in real life, when this plays out, when somebody's got an 8 foot wide vehicle, a pickup truck, and they don't get it all the way over when they try to parallel park because they don't have enough space, how does this actually play out and is 13 feet comfortable? It's just a question.
Yeah, well, I think about even if it were a 10-foot lane and an 8 foot, think about an 8 foot wide car, you would definitely slow down to go around them because you're being very careful. But in a 13-foot lane, yeah, you've got that room. And if somebody slows down to go around them, that could be an issue on 2A, but on these streets, not so much. Someone might think differently on that, but no one's going to get run over by a car that's
Thanks.
slowing down.
The 13 feet is wide enough for the fire vehicles to get through. It's also wide enough to do the maneuvering, not to have continuous traffic flow. So as a car is maneuvering, you're going to wait for that car to make its maneuvers before you try to drive by. It's the traffic calming element, balancing with fire. That's why the dimension.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm not that used to speaking with Rick on, so I'm saying things I should be quiet about and let him do the talking. He says it in a lot fewer words.
Jeff, speaking of which, do we have an ST 3672?
Oh,
I don't think we
excuse
do.
me, 74. We kept the right of ways the same.
Yeah, the rights of way, that I was going to say,
Sorry, the street
that's why I
space.
noticed it. By having standard rights of way, you can make changes later if you need to, after the plan has been prepared. So we actually just have 74 and 80s, I think, and then except for 2A, right?
Yes. And then, some figuring out what to do with the, I would say, egregiously wide piece of Williston Road that is on past Zephyr Road. And I apologize, this is my mistake, just a mistake, should be 74. We have two 74s, two 80s, the 86
Right,
foot.
it's right in plan, it's just not right in the key.
Yeah. And there's some thought to what streets might carry more traffic, what would be busy. Some of the concentration of 74 in this area is thinking more likely to have retail because of this current retail here. And then mixed into that, it's kind of a goulash stew with ingredients. There's an idea, there's some value in a little bit of variation too. Megan.
Yeah, I'm wondering, is it true that the cycle tracks that are fully separate from the road would always be in places with on-street parking?
No,
Um,
no, but like on 2A, there's no parking.
Right, but the cycle track is essentially right next to the road, right, in that case.
Yes,
yes.
So in the cases where you showed one diagram where there was a cycle track that was separated from the road and then also separated from the sidewalk? Am
The
I, or am I,
86, it has the green, this framework streets.
yeah,
It's street, travel lane, parking, bicycle.
cycle track, right.
Cycle.
So that's my question are all of the darker green places where the cycle track is buffered by on-street parking?
Yes, except other than never say always or never. So there might be an exception, but the rule is yes, is that.
Okay, so, and those are parking spaces right off the travel lane. So I guess that's kind of, maybe something we can pay attention to is that, that, and maybe Rick has some additional comments on this, but I think that's having as much consistency as possible for the cycle track streets where there is on-street parking would be a benefit for kind of that element of predictability where you know what to expect.
Yes.
And I was just curious if that was the case, not 2A because there's no on-street parking, but all the other areas that are cycle tracks, are they always buffered by on-street parking?
It's designed by design. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I can't imagine Zephyr Road being redesigned with a separated cycle track. I almost feel like on Zephyr Road, it has to be let bicycles take the lane.
they can still do that.
I think one thing to keep in mind long term, I mean, immediately, no one's going to go out and rebuild Zephyr Lane, but all streets have a lifespan and there's cycles of maintenance and rebuilding. So you have the choice of reconfiguring Zephyr when it does get rebuilt to be this consistent section. But yeah, there's going to be some in Finney Crossing, definitely some incremental change.
I'll just comment that this is a lot to absorb all at once because it's updates and new information. And I think we're still lacking a drawing that shows what we were just talking about last with a cycle track that's separate from parking, separated from parking.
That should be,
So-
that's on page 75, right above 2A.
Well, it's next to the parking. And I thought we were talking about it being separated from the parking, from the on-street parking.
No,
Oh, so I misunderstood Megan's question in your answer. So in areas where there's on-street parking, the cycle track would still be next to the cars?
yes.
That's a good thing. Because,
Okay, except for doors opening.
But we don't have a 3-foot cycle track. We have a 6-foot cycle track.
yeah, that's plenty. And it's one way each way.
Okay,
I think that's fine. And, as a frequent cyclist myself, Yeah, no, I think that's a really good configuration. I'm really happy that that was your answer to my question.
And a
Yeah.
small point, this is ridiculously esoteric, but the first time I started dealing with that section, actually, and Rick was in on this as well, but Steve Price, who does the photo imaging that's so excellent, he is a bicycle advocate, almost to the extreme. But this was something that he was pushing for in a project we did 15 years ago and showed us images of it, and we grabbed it.
Can I just check in, you know, keeping an eye on the time?
Yes, thank you.
It's just
I'm not.
after 8. I guess I'm a little confused on what our process is here tonight. I know we jumped ahead to the public realm because Rick was with us. But I had like a lot of comments on the public realm section, and I wasn't clear on whether you were looking for that feedback tonight, or was what you presented, Jeff, was that kind of like a quick overview and now we're going to go through it in more detail, or was that it? Because I'm a little confused.
We can certainly go through it.
Okay, and there is a lot of changes, which I missed, you know, I read the old one and I can, you know, read on the spot, but, and a lot of my questions or comments are still relevant. But I was just kind of curious about our priorities and given our time.
I would say we can absolutely go straight to talking about, I feel like we've covered the street sections enough. There may be questions, details and comments about it, but I think actually the discussion about the different sections was starting to lighten up a little bit. And I do feel very strongly, you know, these are real street sections, courtesy in large part to Mr. Chelman. So we can certainly answer more questions about them, and why not move on to things like street furniture and noxious weeds.
In which case you don't need me, right?
You don't like noxious weeds? No, I guess we don't.
Thank you for joining us, Rick. It was very
Thank you.
appreciated.
Thank you,
welcome.
Rick.
You're welcome. I'll come back if I'm needed. Have a good evening.
Bye.
Thank you, Rick. So now, yes, you should be seeing the public realm standards, and I would say just I can certainly explain the big page of pink a couple of pages in.
Can we just start on the first page there?
Yes.
I just wanted to add a comment somewhere in the intent section, maybe under the public realm standards, perhaps even in D1.
Mhm.
And this, I suspect that maybe Jill will back me up on this, but and I bet Shayla would if she was here. I would really love to attend to the intergenerational goals of public spaces, and partly to stay attuned to young children being in the space, but also to older folks, given our aging population. And so that, you know, I kept trying to think about both of those populations, the sort of the earlier and the later of parts of the life course, as we look through these different public realm standards. And I would just love to have that notion of, yes, welcoming and safe and interesting, but also intergenerational, such that we aren't trying to separate out children from everyone else, or teenagers from everyone else. But instead trying to mesh those different populations together. And there's some really, really great work in, particularly in some European public space planning, that kind of examines the ways that can be really successful. And so I just would love us to have that kind of in there.
I agree, just and add to the statement that as particular intent. I would say that, the best way to do that is to have the simple space available surrounded by buildings that people living in them. I mean, I know I could send videos when I go 1 block away from my house of the Lincoln Park, where there's a play area in the middle of it. It's kind of depressed. It's just a big green. It's got some children's play areas like play swings and things for infants and, single digit olds. But in the middle, it's a big green, and the grass is a disaster because it gets used so heavily. And you see people out there playing with their dogs, dads throwing football with their kids when their kids are standing this far away like this. It's like urban Mayberry. And that's really the way it should be. So I'm hugely in support of that. And I think the basic form lends itself to that. So yes, noted and recorded, and we'll add language in that.
Thank you. That's all I had on that page.
Okay. 68.
I don't know if anyone else has any comments, but in the dooryard section, number 1, let's see, 1D, about ground cover or grass. I don't know how much we can regulate the height of grass, at least on privately owned space.
I'm pretty darn sure you can, because if the grass is more than 12 inches tall, it's probably not grass, unless you're prairie
Right.
grass or something. But then it becomes a weed. And most of this language, not all of the language, I mean, there's always something new in the code, but a lot of this language has been through 15 prior planners in different places. But I think if it's taller than 12 inches, it's called a weed.
Okay, so fair enough, but there are some efforts to have more like natural landscapes that use different species and are planned that way, that it's not weeds, but it's unmowed,
Yeah.
sections.
Definitely.
And I would just like to acknowledge that that's possible, that maybe the exception after the 12-inch height, that it say something like except planned and maintained natural landscaping or something like along those lines.
Yeah, I'm not against that. I'm concerned though about, and it does happen, and it's not going to happen early in a first building's planted, but there is always a concern about somebody who plants bamboo in their front, and it becomes and actually, my mother was fined about 16 times by the city of Denver. Buffalo grass, and anyway, so we'll make some kind of expand on that, I think.
Okay. Okay, I think like my others, I had a couple other small comments, but I think they're preempted by your new pink materials. So why don't we just move to that?
Okay, and Yeah, what happened with this, all this pink is an earlier suggestion, let's go ahead and let's have some consistency. And I think that's really important with the street lights especially. Secondarily, with the benches and the bins. So that sort of pricked the balloon and let all this out. There's not a specification for the street lights. I put together some information that I've forwarded to Matt's people and Taylor about some possibilities that I gathered. I could have gone ahead and picked a light and a pole, but there's so many choices. I think all the choices I put up there are fine, and there's some that have really different aesthetics. And I think maybe there's a process, doesn't have to happen now, but maybe that's an ongoing process where maybe the planning commission reviews those. And I think it'll, in a good way, kind of drive you crazy because somebody will like the Oxford A and somebody else will like the Taylor B. But at some point, just make a choice. There are a bunch of good ones. I did go ahead because I think they're so simple and throw down some choices for the benches and the bends. They're almost generic, and then there are other alternatives that, as I looked at them, I think they only look very different to the people who design these. And there's some other choices where I looked at and I thought somebody would get hurt if they fell on them because they have pointy ends and things. But so I know we're dumping a lot of information on you. And some of the things about spacing and placement were adopted from prior codes we've done, so they've had more vetting. Like how often the benches and bends, but it's not scientific. Go, Megan.
I did have a question about the benches. It's not specified necessarily about which way they face. And I was wondering what thoughts are on that.
I didn't want to put it in the code, but it's possible to put a bench in it and have it facing in a dump direction. If it's out in the tree lawn, just facing the street with your back to the sidewalk and the people and the buildings, that would be bad. It'd be like
Yeah,
a room full of people behind you.
that was my concern. I don't want to watch traffic and parked cars, I want to see people.
And I would, I guess I would hope you could leave that to the installers and to Public Works and Matt. And you can also, unbolt them and turn them around. Would you like to add if they're parallel, if they're installed parallel to the street, they should be facing where the people are?
Yeah, I think so, because that way, if someone did put a bench, say within the dooryard, it would face the sidewalk. And if someone puts, and if the town puts one in the tree lawn, it should face the sidewalk. Or perhaps be two facing each other perpendicular to the street. But definitely not, I've seen so many benches. We have them in town that sit and face the traffic. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me.
Could it be the traffic engineers install
I
those?
think so.
Except at the bus stop.
Well, yeah, that's a good exception, but.
Consider it soon done. Chapin.
I wondered if it's just a placeholder, but I wondered if we should say something about charging infrastructure because we say there can't be any mechanical anywhere in the street space. But I think we're going to be at some point allowing for charging stations somewhere on the street space.
I would, in my brain is there are creaking sounds in my skull right now, thinking we had some conversation about this before, and I'm afraid that this means that I missed it. But there's a conversation about having charging stations, allowing for that infrastructure within the blocks, which is where the most of the parked cars will be. That might be simply added here.
Yeah, I think we should just have a placeholder for it. I don't think we need to resolve the details.
No. Yeah, especially since that kind of thing is just changes every.
To me, it's sort of in the same category as fire hydrants.
Yeah, that one, yes. I want to confer with some people on that one. I think it's easy. I'm not sure about it in the street with the fire hydrants because of the overturn. I am sure, I think it's a layup to have stations in the parking lots and the blocks.
Yeah, maybe you misunderstood what I said. I just, the category of
Oh,
infrastructure that's in the street belt.
Okay, I withdraw my.
Yeah, if I can show you some local examples of that.
I think I remember you charging your car in Taft Corners when I was up there. All right. What else in, say, 69? Bike racks?
Yeah, I just looked up what this design is, and they're boring, but functional, I guess. I don't think it was here. I think it was elsewhere. When you talked about there was some kind of frequency with which bike racks had to be placed, and also the location. And I'm having a hard time reading this pink text because it's kind of tiny for me, but I wondered, let's see, on both sides, oh, there we go. Both sides of the street within the tree lawn. Okay, at time of development.
Frequency should be in the parking standards.
Right, okay, that's because I read those tonight as well. Okay, that's why I was thinking of it. Anyway, so I will leave that for now because I had thoughts about that. And
I will say, I can quote Matt we had a conversation about, the idea of picking, and he was reassured by the or equivalent.
Yeah.
Language. And I threw in dark green finish. Is that like an outsider's view of Vermont's color?
It's fine. I mean, we're used to being assigned dark green for everything, so. But I did wonder also about, like, is there any possibility for, and this might be more suitable in an alley situation, but is there any possibility for covered bike parking?
Yes, although, and that's, I believe the standards, and my brain isn't that precise to pull out exactly what it is, but I believe we refer to parking can be private parking that goes with the building, can be inside the building. If the building has the very common in Taft Corners now, kind of basement parking, that's a great place to have, you can get one parking space can be, I don't know, 20 or more bicycles.
Right, I was thinking more about in the sort of shop front area. And because if we're trying to encourage all this cycling to your destination, the two bike parking spots per 1,000 square feet or whatever it is, I can't remember exactly the standard. I don't necessarily think that's going to be sufficient, and I think there might actually be a case to be made for a more central and maybe covered bike parking area. And we can even put solar panels on it to keep Chapin happy. But just wondering if
Yeah, my thought
that
is,
could be considered.
well, my thought is these are minimums. And what if, I mean, the town could always do a specific intervention and plan, build a little bicycle station. But the other aspect is a shop owner. I mean, what if we were explicit that a shop owner could put bicycle parking in their dooryard? So you have sound like a Republican, which I won't tell you if I am or not. But small scale capitalism, that shop owner could put a bicycle rack in their dooryard under their awning, right in front of their shop, which is, customers to my coffee shop. So these are just minimums.
Yeah, point taken, but I would like to think bigger than that when it comes to bike parking, given the emphasis on pedestrian and bike friendly planning that we're doing. It just seems insufficient not to have a diversity of types of bike parking, some covered, some open, maybe bike lockers somewhere, near transit sites. And just to have a bit more kind of like, this is our chance to bump up the expectations for bike parking. And we're doing all this stuff around cycle tracks and everything else, but if we don't address the bike parking, then it's not as supportive of the other kinds of infrastructure.
Taylor.
Yeah, no, we can reanalyze the options, I think, as staff. I think, another thing we may want to think about is our use standards are pretty minimal, but we could think about a specific use standard for residential in Taft Corners in terms of required in-building bike parking or bike storage. Those sorts of standards are becoming more common in urban areas. So that's just one other thing that we can think about, another option.
I would say
That's
also,
great. Thank you.
yeah, Megan and anyone and everyone else. I know you can't read that. It's a little silly, but on the first copy you have, and the only copy you have is section 6, page 76. Has number 7 bicycle parking at the top. Let's all, not now, but right after this, take a look at that and see if we want to beef that up. Because one thing I'll add, throw fuel on the fire. There's bicycles and then there are electric bicycles, and I don't want to talk about that, whether they're little motorcycles or not, but that's a very growing thing, and a lot of people are starting to raise a lot of eyebrows. And I have friends who I never would have thought got electric bicycles, and they're talking about how they use them, twice as much, 3 times as much as they would. That's a form of transportation that is really growing. So you've got to.
It's growing a lot here.
You got a very good point.
And I absolutely agree that. And that's part of my hesitation also with that particular bike rack is they sometimes don't fit the e-bikes quite as well, which tend to be a bit chunkier. And to try to get a lock around the bike and that particular design can be challenging. But, again, they're here already in Vermont, and we should support them because that's another, non-fossil fuel based transportation mode. And to the extent that we can accommodate them, even have, top off charging available and supported in our code, then even better.
And they're small. I mean, it's like
Right, compared to cars, yes, but
the
but
revolution, the evolution. Yeah. Okay. So
thank you. Thank you for taking your time to pay attention to my little pet project.
we all may be writing on your little pet project, it's very soon, e-versions. Public open space. One thing I would actually, I'd like to quickly, I'm thinking about public open space. Shayla is not on, but I remember when we did the walking tour up there, one of her comments was to let our open spaces be more than just grass. And when she said this, we're walking by what is really the mega expanse of open, very manicured lawn, probably has a lot of chemical products put on it. Sorry, but here, and she had a real point. To that, I want to make a point. Looking at the good Lord. Looking at the regulating plan, I think I'm freezing up a little, is kind of look at how much of this natural area, and then over here, I don't show the green, but this is all natural, how in really close adjacency, we have real natural area. But there are a few places where it is the simple lawn, because that's the place that you can play catch. You don't need to join a team or anything. You can sit and eat lunch. They're incredibly flexible spaces there just to be used to do whatever. Megan.
I have a lot of comments on tonight. In the general standards B under public open space, number 1, it says squares and greens shall be surrounded by street trees. Can we just have a little caveat about that to not put trees around spots where there might be a really great mountain view? Because I think that's like one of our nicest opportunities in Taft Corners is to take advantage of those long views of either the Green Mountains or the Adirondacks, depending on where you're standing. But if we fill it all in with trees, we won't be able to see them anymore.
Yeah, I wrote it down. I don't think it's a problem because you can vary the spacing and set up special things, special views.
But I don't know if it's on everyone's radar screen. Like, the contractor comes in and is supposed to plant trees, around the edge and at this much spacing, and that, that might not, that'll just not even get any attention.
I think when we talk about the regulating plan, I think that's something that the regulating plan in some places, like right there by the big pond, where you've noted some topo differences. I think we could actually, there's some places we could actually X marks the spot, designate them as a viewpoint.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's helpful.
The term, you probably saw the term town arborist is something that right now you don't have one. That might be someone designated. And in 10 years, you might have one. Jill,
Would this be the spot in public open space, maybe in your general standards where we would talk about some of those like freestanding WCs? Burlington Square has one near the little water park. I just think not having people having to purchase stuff to use a restroom, especially with COVID, being able to do it without going into buildings when you have kids and you're not really trying to go into facilities, you're just using green spaces and you need to go potty real quick. I think I've loved that Burlington added that. I think we could have multiple with the size of our space we're talking about.
yes, and I should have already inserted something like that. Yes, it is. And it's a very civilized thing that they have in a lot of places. I don't think it's only in Europe, but I think of it as in Europe.
Yeah,
Just
definitely
kind of
here. But I
recognizing
mean, Burlington
where
just added one.
people-
I think that's huge.
Yeah, Jeff, the one in Burlington's one of those Portland loos. It's in City Hall Park. I'll send you the spec for that.
Okay, I'm wondering, benches, waste recycling bins, bicycle racks. There's a number 7 or 8 here. Something. Yeah, and I'm sure it's happened to all of us. You get caught out and Kate,
Well, I'm just wondering, I mean, is that, who's gonna clean that? Because that's something that would need to be highly sanitized often.
that's a good point. That's something it's going to have to grow into, to have there needs to be some kind of critical mass of buildings there. So that may be a conversation we have with Matt and Taylor about how some of these things can be phased in. We could fast forward to critical mass of buildings there, generating tax base. It really is not a problem because they're paying, this contributes, it's a real positive tax flow, but right now, no, so that's a good point. And that's a point that it comes up on several issues. And I think it comes up, any conversation with Bruce or the Public Works Department, it's one of the first things he mentions. Understandably, I need money to do this. So Matt, Taylor, that's on our list of.
Might have lost our speaker over there.
Yes.
The tree list. I couldn't help but notice that they're all deciduous. And I think that would be horrible for 4 or 5 months of the year. We need some green.
But these aren't the only trees. There are trees everywhere. People may have trees in the yards, in the block interiors. The parks, the natural areas will have whatever grows naturally. But trees that don't, generally pine and conifers make lousy street trees for reasons of toughness. But also, you really want those things to drop their leaves so you get a little sun.
I understand that part. I just feel like if you're going to provide us a list that at least explaining that would be helpful. That this is for street trees only, that, why pines aren't on this list. And I would love for us to be able to have some evergreens maybe they're not right on the street, but certainly like in the greens and squares, could we have a couple evergreens? I just feel like we have a pretty long, what we call stick season. And we need to break it up with some evergreens. Or it's just not, the street trees aren't gonna, they're not gonna do their job with our, the length of time that we just don't have leaves on them.
Hey, I grew up in Colorado.
That's different though.
We can, Megan, underneath F4 there, under public space trees,
Mhm.
we do make reference, I think we should fix the reference a little bit to reference the specific guide by the Vermont Urban and Community Forestry Program, but plenty of non-deciduous trees, coniferous trees are referenced in the guide that could be used.
Okay, great. Yeah, if we can just kind of daylight that a little bit, it would be awesome. Thank you.
What's your favorite conifer?
Well, I'm partial to spruces, but I realize that a lot of them aren't native. I think maybe the white spruce is native and not the blue spruce or something like that. Chapin's the tree guy around here, so you can ask him.
Interesting article I saw somewhere online about someone, naturalist, saying we need to rethink our idea about native species because of climate change. Species are starting to move.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah, we know
quite-
that very well with our maples.
Chapin,
I'm going to disagree with you a little bit, Megan. Coniferous trees make lousy street trees because you're supposed to trim the bottom for visibility. And most of them then either droop their limbs or look scrawny. And getting more sun to the street in the winter is important. So I think deciduous for street trees is appropriate. I have a problem with the list, and I would also like it to somewhere say clearly that native species are always favored because they contribute more to the local ecosystem. And so I think allowing ginkgo is on the list is probably okay, but I have some issues with other parts of it, and I'll submit more detailed comments with that separately.
I look forward to hearing them. My colleagues call me a tree blank, whatever, for my advocacy of street trees. So something I'm really interested in. And they just cut down a huge red maple across from me because it was crammed into a little tiny space and its roots were bulging over it and it got a fungus, got hollowed out in the middle. I've got still got the shakes from that. Now it's this big empty space. Okay, enough. Next. Those are, you all pointed out some good, if not holes, weak points. Could we be done?
Jeff, if I could give a inappropriate comment, I don't like the roofs and all your pictures of the different street cross sections.
Uh-oh.
And I don't like the dormers, etc.
Well,
but I don't, it's not the purpose of the drawings. And I think you were trying to show that you could have pitched roofs and they could have dormers and so forth. Also, there aren't enough balconies, and some of the designs that are for non-storefront, some of the designs that are for non-storefront streets have the awning showing in the bottom as though it is for storefront. So those are trivial objections, just my personal preferences.
Well, that could be, okay. We'll work on that. What's your problem with the roofs? Because I'm curious, we might be able to, a tweak might be an easy thing. You want to see a flat spot with solar cells?
I would like to see solar on some of the roofs, yes. And if someone were to do what's shown here, they'd have to do a lot of work to prevent ice from falling on the sidewalk.
Yep.
And so I'd like to show something that's a little more practical, and we would have a steep, I thought that's less than the minimum pitch that we've specified.
Well, it might be, but the thing about snow on roofs is it's every place in the world. I lived in Switzerland for a year. I lived in Colorado. Traditional architecture had pitched roofs, except in the Mojave Desert, because rain falls down, water falls downhill, and so does snow. And it's not like there's some technical surprise about snow. People have been living in the Alps, you know, they were there before the Romans came. It's not a big deal to deal with snow on a roof. Snow dogs, I mean, it's not a special technology.
I know, I just haven't seen it done well in Vermont, and pitching a roofs when it could be flat makes it harder to hide the mechanicals, and makes it harder to have as much solar capture.
And then it employs people to patch the roof because they leak much sooner when they're flat.
I would echo your comment about that problem has been solved the world over. Yes, it happens.
Yeah, I'm having my flat roof, you know, replaced and every 15 years. Okay, we might even put some snow dogs on there. I think it's a good point. I'd like to, maybe we could hollow out a flat spot and put in some solar cells. That's definitely worth it. Just raises the issue that, hey, we favor that.
Thank you,
Okay.
Jeff.
No, thank you. And I am interested in your comments on the trees. Maybe not now.
No, I'll submit something.
Okay, thank you, Chapin.
So just to kind of regroup, what is your preference? Matt, I'm not sure, did you want us to try to talk about the building form standards, or was that something you were going to respond to? We've got about 10 minutes that we could address some pressing issues.
Let me see if I can just summarize what I saw. I saw survey responses from Jill, Megan, and Chapin. And I've copy pasted those directly to Jeff, so he has your words.
Matt, I also submitted survey results, but I did it a bit late. So if you wouldn't mind also forwarding those on.
Absolutely, will do.
Yep.
So, you know, where we left off with building form, we had a lot of discussion on the general standards that apply everywhere in one way or another, but we hadn't had a lot of discussion on the standards for the specific frontage categories, the 4 categories that are mapped into the regulating plan. So absent one comment in support of one height standard in one of those, I didn't see a lot of feedback on height. There are some selections that could be made there, but we had a sort of a more general conversation with the group that was here last week. General interest in height, you know, being an element of design that allows for integrating affordability and doing things, achieving some of the other goals of the town plan. So I'm not demanding that everybody give me fine grained input on building height. I'm just saying I'm not seeing a lot of response in the survey related to the heights as they're played out in those form standards, because that's one of the ways in which those form areas are different from one another. You go from bigger to smaller, essentially. Couple comments we got on names, and then names of the areas. And Jill, I think you called out, we talked about using a little less loaded term than urban manners when we're discussing how new development integrates up against the existing neighborhood. We talked about turning that to urban relationships, and I think you saw some of those change, but not all. And
I was also
Chapin,
wondering, sorry,
go right
just
ahead.
with the ideas of, you asked for feedback in the survey on naming, and I wasn't being clever when I was going through that, but I think maybe that's an opportunity for public input. I know other towns and cities have crowdsourced that kind of stuff. Granted, we have to be like, there's some goofiness that can happen, but it's a good way to get public input for renaming kind of those zones so that they could be Williston specific or Williston unique. The public might come up with good options.
We can just jump right to urban McUrby face if you want and skip
Yeah.
the public input.
Yep.
Yeah,
Sorry,
there's
terrible
a
joke.
possibility for that, of course. But in terms of like, where are we trying to
Sorry.
go with it?
Love to bring it out to the school kids, just like the snow plows, for sure. No, I mean, I think that's good. And, I think it's the same thing as we've talked about, sort of the uniquely Williston stuff. Chapin had some comments about just, really pumping up the support for solar in regards to the way we talk about form. And then I think a discussion that we might have a little more offline about how we make sure there's good ADA access to buildings, because we have questions about floors and lobbies and entering at street level, how to sort of, I think if I'm reading all that right, we certainly don't want to tell somebody who's using wheels, whether it's a wheelchair, stroller, or anything else, we don't want to tell them that they always have to use the rear entrance. But there's a bunch of ways to go after that without being too heavy-handed on design. Jeff, I see you've got your hand up on that one.
In the world I live in, you can't do that unless you're a single family house. Every place I've worked and my colleagues, ADA is like, usually gets overinterpreted and enforced beyond what it really requires. And I remember Chapin described some situation where they're trying to get around it. You might warn them that somebody's going to sue their pants off. I just see that as an irresistible force. It's always been something that's dominated anything we have done. You can't resist its requirements. You have to work with it. So I'm a little concerned about trying to get tied up with another existing regulation that is, well-known, overrides anything we write. I think it's a little bit, I feel like it's unnecessary, but I'm also concerned that we get crosswise and come up with some requirement that gets crosswise with the ADA enforcement, and B, becomes limiting on what someone's solutions can be. Chapin.
Thanks.
That's my rant.
I actually, on that point, I would just, if staff could check with South Burlington on what they're going through with those apartment buildings in that new stuff off Kennedy Drive, and see why that's been an issue, that would totally answer my question.
I'm really curious.
There's something that I didn't put in my comments that I wanted to ask about, and it's on the revised one. It's on page 9, which is actually numbered page 23. And I think this occurs in several of them, where it says F, balconies, where balconies are required or where balconies are being used as a method for achieving the required private open area. And it didn't make sense to me that balconies can qualify as private open area, because I thought the idea of private open area was that it was for the building, not for individual units of the building. Did I miss something there?
The big tent is private open area, is supposed to be private. For single family, it can be private to the family. For common buildings, it has to start to be some kind of community or building wide thing. But balconies are the one exception where you can actually have an apartment that does have its own private open space. So that's a luxury, but it's definitely still private open space. It's actually, in a way, it's more private.
So what I am worried about is back to a comment I brought up last time, which is if you have quite a few units in an apartment building and most of those people have dogs and they're trying to walk their dog in the private area. Now, if some of that calculation of the private area is for balconies, I really worry that maybe we haven't specified enough space.
Yeah, Chapin, I would say we absolutely have, because typically in zoning, they'll have a maximum lot coverage, and anything that you're not building on, leftover land, counts as open area. So, 20% open area, a lot of that can be garbage space, little slots between buildings and things. This 20%, or whatever the number we ended up with, is only part of the buildable area. So any side rear setbacks, those are in addition. So it's typically a number bigger than that.
And you sort of convinced me of that, but then if somebody had a lot of balconies, could that add up to their entire space?
No, there's a limit on it. What did we say? I'm thinking 30%, but I'm not reading that, but that's. All right.
Whoops, I don't need to belabor the point either.
I need to look it up. Who wrote this thing anyway? No. Oh, gee, page 18 up to 33%, so a third.
I see, there we go. Yeah. Okay. And I did want to reiterate one of the comments that, which is about balustrades or railings on balconies. You were worried about what people had stored on their balcony and how visible that was from the street. And I'm really worried about a different aesthetic and thinking that I really would like to be able to have wrought iron balconies be a decorative, wrought iron railings.
Yes.
And so the 20, I think you have it there as 25 to 70%, which was a change from the 50%.
I saw that comment and I want to change that to 20%. And I would say if it is a decorative wrought iron balcony and not just a minimal to building code balcony, you can achieve 20% because it's going to be a little more than just 4-inch bars. So
okay. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we were not excluding that because I would choose other ways to control what people store on their porches that's visible from the street than to say that you couldn't look into it. Thank you.
Megan.
Just a really quick comment that let's see, let me get the right, in C elements, the section is, C2C, stoops or front porches. It's on my page 22, which is the old page, I think. So stoops must be fully covered by a roof or canopy, and I don't think that's right.
I would suggest it is, even though you see a lot of stoops that aren't. It's better for the climate where you have weather, keeps stuff off the door, gives you a place to stand out of the weather. And then talking about flat facades and having some shade and shadow and relief, that roof projection adds
But that suggests that the entire stairway, out the front.
Not the stairs, the stoop.
Okay, can we just define that?
Yes. No.
Because if you literally, if you Google stoop, do Google image stoop, you get stairs, right? Not just a little recessed door frame. You get stairs. And I think people, when, I mean, in whatever, Brooklyn, stoop culture, that's sitting on the stairs. That's
Mhm.
not the immediate door frame. And I get your point, but I think there's a little bit of like a lack of clarity there.
I'll put that in the yes or right category.
Okay, thank you. I don't need to keep track, but just kind of a quick call out there. Taylor's rolling his eyes.
No,
I
it's
actually interpreted it just like you and didn't question it. And when you said it, I was like, oh, well, that is crazy. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
Right, okay.
my bad.
All right. So minding the time, are we pretty much wrapped up with this? Are there other final comments that anybody wants to make on the building form standards?
Megan, can I just ask just more general? I really liked the survey. It gave me a chance to sort of sit down and really think over these things. I sent a lot of feedback in writing that I didn't feel like it was necessary to go over as much here because I think it'll make it to Jeff. Can we just do the same with the section we just reviewed on the public areas too? I'll be honest, I didn't get a chance trying to catch up to you guys to go into that as much as I wanted. I think it'd be really useful to send out a similar survey.
Yeah, I should keep my mouth shut because I'm not the one doing the work.
I think you could cut your work in half for the survey because I was not the only one who was confused by, we seem to be asked the same questions twice. And it was like, what comments do you have on these pages? And then you get to the next section, it's like, what comments do you have on this section? And so it was a little confusing and I think more work than needs to be. Yeah, I found it also helpful to have that kind of time on my own time to kind of go through a little bit.
I also appreciated all the changes that were made from the last time, even though I listed some things again, or in addition, it was nice to see the responsiveness.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I'm trying.
Okay.
Capable of learning.
Very
Still.
important. That's great. Other final comments? Matt, do you have anything to send us off with?
No, I hear you on the survey. We'll put something simple together that's just geared toward you guys walking through through public realm and providing any additional feedback, and we'll consolidate that back. We're scheduled to move on to some other sections in the next couple of meetings. So we'll see everybody in 2 weeks.
Can you remind us of what are we going to be covering next time?
Yep, you are headed for
Regulating plan, as well as capital budget and operating budget, which are non-form based code agenda items.
yeah. So you'll have
Okay.
Shirley probably up front on the meeting to talk through capital budget. There's a capital budget summary on the select board agenda tonight, but the complete document I will probably have to send to you all tomorrow. So that you can look at it. I think it's getting rolled out to the select board tonight, and then I'll be able to hand it over to you folks tomorrow. So a little diversion from form-based code.
I think we also wanted to take a look at that administrative section too, if possible, on the 21st.
Yeah,
it's
we can do
fairly
that.
short.
Yeah.
And I don't think that the PC has that section yet. That's section 8.
No.
And so just know that we're drafting that now. We're going to discuss it on Thursday and hope to get it finalized and out to you. Fingers crossed, maybe Friday, maybe next Monday.
Oh, quick, everyone, because one of the comments mentioned having trouble finding urban neighborhood and something about it being blue, which made me think you may have a really old, okay, it should look like this with yellow around the edges and a lot of finning.
Oh,
yeah.
no, it wasn't on the map, which I do have, you know, it was the building form standards. Urban neighborhood frontages is highlighted in blue, and I didn't know where that was on the map.
I'm looking for someone to blame. Um,
Oh, like those colors should all match up.
um,
Right, I couldn't find blue on my map, which I have.
This is a definite, yeah, sorry, this is my, this is a real Homer Simpson moment. That should be yellow. That's just one of those
Okay.
things.
But then you showed us tonight a new one that
Yes,
showed the types
it
of
does have
streets that
blue.
has the blue and stuff, and which is very, I'm looking forward to that new map.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah,
Actually, I think we could send that out to you.
Yeah, we'll
Probably
print out
tomorrow.
large and 11x17s of those so you can add them to your folder.
I
It's-
took
I
a
will say,
picture of it.
It's a little bit sloppier. It's an indication. I think it's going to evolve, but it will tell you where things go.
Right,
And also
Okay.
it's a little more plastic. So I'm thinking it's not really part of the code. It's part of the town's implementation. It's part of the plan, if that makes any sense.
Yes, it ties in with our official map.
right.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, so motion to adjourn?
Sure.
All right, Chapin, Kate, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. This was really fascinating tonight and appreciate your ongoing participation. So thank you, and
you all.
see you in 2 weeks.
Good night.
Thank you all.
Going to be
Thanks,
great.
everybody.
Good night.